So I was obsessed about getting you on this podcast, Mitch, and I was excited for your story to be shared. So, first of all, tell us how you went from brand, corporate America, specifically, AB, and then joined a small agency. Help us understand the rationale behind.
Well, it was quite interesting because I had spent 8 years at Anheuser-Busch, and I had worked with very large advertising agencies as a result of launching the Bud Light brand, being involved in new products. So I really had my pick of some of the bigger and more creative shops because a lot of them worked for Anheuser-Busch at the time. Great people. But during the time of doing new products, which was very fast and furious, I would need ideas quickly. And I had met a guy in St. Louis, Jack Thorwegen, who was a creative director, who I just thought was had the freshest ideas ever. They weren't always fleshed out, but I could go to him and I could get some good work and get it executed quickly for about a third of the price. So when I when I was leaving new products going back to the beer side, Jack approached me and said, "Why don't we start an agency? Your client side is outstanding." I mean, I thought he was the creativest guy I'd met. And so I just literally left Anheuser-Busch, which kind of shocked a lot of people because I was doing well. I was moving up. I was a pretty high level female in their executive ranks. But I just thought owning my own business sounded amazing and we could do good things together. So
Was
that's
it?
how I left the brand business and ended up on the agency side.
That's a typical storyline when people are making that transition. Was it, getting ahead of the story, but was it everything you expected, or what was the biggest shock from going from brand side to agency side?
Well, obviously, we had no money. At Anheuser-Busch, I had huge budgets, so it wasn't so hard to look brilliant, right? When you had all this money and you had all these resources to help you do that. I sort of realized it was just us kids. Like, we brought on another guy who was acting as an account person and then another guy as a writer. We all thought we were pretty special and deserved to be paid a decent amount of money. And when you have to create that dollar every day, every week, every month, that was a lot. And we had faith in ourselves. We worked really hard. Unfortunately, my creative partner, every time we'd get a job, if it was $1,000 budget, he'd spend 15,000 to prove to the client how good we were. And I'm like, okay, Jack, 5 more of those and we're out of business. So, I really had to work with him, training him the business side of, here's how much we can spend when we get a budget from somebody. And it was my job to go find the clients. So it was a good mix because having sat in a client's seat, especially for a company like Anheuser-Busch, I could get people to pick up the phone. But then I had to, go have the meeting. I had to show them some portfolio stuff and, get them to hire us.
Oh, in our prep, we had talked about that being your first exposure to kind of a transaction. You bought your way into the tiny one, two,
Exactly.
three-person agency. So what were some of the things you
I
learned about
did.
that, and how did that shake out?
Well, I had no knowledge how to do that, and I didn't find someone to guide me in that regard. I was still pretty young. I was anxious and excited about working for myself. So he made a proposal to me to be able to buy into a minority stake, and so not only did I take less salary and benefits, but I then had to start writing checks to buy equity and seemed like the grown up thing to do, right? So I did not get advice from anyone. And it was probably the silliest thing I did. People have said, do you feel like what you were offered was fair based on what you were bringing? At the time, I didn't have any perspective on that. So I thought it was fair. I did it. I'm glad I did it. It really worked out well for me. But I have since learned that you make your money on the way in, not on the way out. So that would be one piece of advice for someone that's starting to do something similar.
Yeah, you make your money on the way in. If you could go back in time and give yourself advice, would it be as simple as go seek help from someone? What would you whisper in your ear? Here's how you value an agency. What are some of the nuggets that you think really would help you make more money on that way in?
Today, it's so different today because of the way agencies are structured and what they're looking for. But, I do believe that, that it was a fair deal because, I had confidence in myself as a business person and the ability to talk to clients and bring in business. But I felt like without the right creativity and execution of that creativity, it really didn't matter. I really wasn't worth anything without that partner. So we both really valued each other's perspective. We respected each other's opinion. And honestly, I don't see that all the time in agencies. I see where creatives sort of run the show and the account people are just, running around and handling and making sure clients are happy. But that isn't how we started. And it was really important to the growth of our agency and the success and the final outcome. While I feel like I was equally um, as talented, I didn't have the courage, I guess, to say, hey, this should be 50-50 or 49-51, whatever. I just didn't. And I would recommend that people talk to other people that have, like myself, that have been through this to see what they think they're worth and, how to negotiate that in the best way.
You not only were focusing on the client side and getting new clients, you brought in the whale. So your first client, big client in the agency was what brand?
Well, it was Anheuser-Busch, and it was a lot of the beer brands that they had. And you know what? That was people were upset that I left the brewery, but I think they realized, the brands I didn't work on, that now we could work on them, right? So I knew all those people. They were friends of mine. That lasted for a couple of years. And the sad thing is, we ended up resigning them because as we brought on new clients and realized how clients from New York and California treated us and compensated us, we started to realize that Anheuser-Busch was this big whale in our shop. They took 80% of our resources in terms of people and delivered 20% of the profit. And so again, my business hat, at the end of the year, I'd look at that and I'd say, Jack, this is nuts. We're not making enough money to devote the kind of talent and resources we are to this client and look at the other clients that are really delivering our profitability. So we started talking about, if we resigned them, who could we work with? And obviously, the second biggest brewer was Miller Brewing Company in Milwaukee. And I said,
Shame.
well, let me go up there.
Did you have to
And
cover with a
I
tarp
was
and a big
hoping
old
no one
hat?
would, yeah, I was hoping no one would recognize me, and I walked off the elevator and somebody yelled my name in the hall. So, at the end of the day, we ended up starting to work for Miller Brewing Company, and we had to resign Anheuser-Busch to do that, which caused all sorts of consternation with our bankers and staff. And you can only imagine it was a big deal, like
And the beer you could keep
resigning
in the
them.
fridge.
Yeah. My husband was so confused. He's always like, wait, well, I was just liking that beer brand. Why can't I drink it anymore?
You seem to have an awareness around being heavily dependent on one or two major clients. And where do you think that came from? And what led to you really feeling motivated to diversify to continue to expand the business?
Well, we had lost probably 5 or 6 years into it. We had developed a big book of business with Ralston Purina, which was based in St. Louis. And as we were growing and adding employees, a lot of people they had their in-house agency, and it at the time had probably 150 employees in Checkmark. And so a lot of those people would apply for jobs, and we would cherry pick the best of them. And I was asked to go to lunch by the VP of that creative group one day, and I did. And he basically threatened me and said, if you hire any more of my people, I'll make sure that you don't get any business from Ralston Purina. And I was completely indignant and said, look, it's a free country. Your people can work anywhere they want, our agency or the other 10 that are in the city. It's up to you to have the work that keeps them motivated and they don't want to come to work for me. And unfortunately, about 3 weeks later, their best package designer jumped ship and came on to our side. And literally Monday morning, I get a letter saying that we are banned from Ralston Purina. And at the time, it was 30% of our business. So my creative partner and I decided we came in at 7 in the morning and we'd stay till 7 at night calling both coasts, soliciting business, just trying to replace that revenue. And back in the day, it was pretty much a project to project. So the type of agency that we had, you could earn projects, but there weren't a lot of agency of record contracts at the time. When Miller Brewing Company, we had worked there a couple of years, project to project, and just kept building and building the business. And it was more than AB pretty quickly. I get a call from them, from their VP of marketing, asking me to fly up and meet with them. They wanted to combine all 10 agencies they were using and put it in our shop. And what that meant was they said they would give us 90 days to figure out, where to put all these people. We had to hire 120 people in 90 days, which is impossible in St. Louis. And I think they felt like they could hold off the work until that period of time. Well, when they announced to their people, here's what we're going to do, we're combining everything at Zipatoni, their people weren't giving out any new projects starting today because they take 3, 4, 5 months to execute, right? So all of that work came to us immediately before the people were on staff. So again, we're working 7 to 7, doing the work, interviewing people, and it was a slog to get it pulled off. But at the end of the day, we ended up having like a $32 million annual contract from Miller Brewing Company, which we never would have seen from Anheuser-Busch. And that made us think, now we need to build our other book of business because this is too big. If anything would happen to this client, we have to have other clients. And so the fact that they did that with us, it was in the media, people knew about it. A lot of our clients like Bacardi and Energizer and Visa all said, well, we want to do that. What does that mean? What would that mean for us if we did a contract with you? So all of a sudden, we're a completely different shop. And it was, the best move ever. And we had no idea going into it that that would happen.
You hopped on a rocket ship. What
Yeah.
what level of sourcing? How did you find these talents to get the work done? How did you not burn everybody out by saying yes
You
and
know
going,
what?
we'll figure it out?
Yeah, it was extremely hard. And I'm telling you, the kids that came and worked for us, again, it goes back to, I think, the respect that the 4 senior people had for each other and how we worked together. So we were able to attract the right kind of people. And we had such a wonderful culture. Everybody wanted to be part of that culture. But you just run out of bodies. And so we were hunting in Texas and Chicago. We ended up opening a Chicago office. We had 5 regional offices to support Miller Brewing Company, but then we opened Chicago really just to feed our talent pipeline.
Did you feel confident in hiring? Because you jumped in 2 feet and head first, or however we want to make the metaphor. And you're really expanding and kind of bringing on talent at a pace that makes it hard to even qualify them. How did you develop as a
I
professional
always
with that?
we kissed a lot of frogs. In the very beginning, our screen was really tight, and we made sure that they senior positions met with quite a few people in the agency, understood the reality of it, and then we'd force ourselves to go to dinner with them that night. And it got to the point, after you've seen a couple hundred people, I could tell in the first 10 minutes whether I wanted to go to dinner with that person or not. And it's like, that was my gut check. If I didn't want to go with them, my client probably wouldn't want to either. And so we got a lot better on, picking and choosing. And there were a few that got through that should not have. And there were people that we had. I mean, I know you hear this from other people, but sometimes the people you start with are not the people that are going to get you to the next level. There were a few people like that we had to say goodbye to just because they weren't keeping up and up to the level that we were expecting. And one of them came back twice. We let him go once and he came back another time. We let him go again. And each time he would go learn what he needed to learn, but come back to us. And that was one of my favorite stories, that's awesome. We know who you are and we love you. Just improve your talent and you're welcome back.
That's amazing. We had talked about you going into this venture kind of with the end in mind. Like you knew that you wanted to build something of that value and potentially get to a sale at some point in the future. Um, did you run those conversations in parallel? Did you put it in the backlog or in the shadows of the annual discussions? Like how often were you thinking, oh, wow, look how big we are. Look how attractive we're becoming. Is it the time? What was the selling process or the exit conversation?
So in the beginning, when we talked about it, it was a 5-year plan. In 5 years, we were going to sell the agency and retire, which it's like, sounds good to me. So within 5 years, we were not big enough. The whole thing is it's basically an earn out based on your revenue. And so at the end of 5 years, we thought none of us can retire on this. We got to keep going. We've got to keep building. And we had some real tough times, especially when we worked with Anheuser-Busch. They had a process that basically they didn't pay you for 180 days. So some of these projects we did for them were multi-million-dollar projects, and we had to pay our people every 2 weeks. We had to pay our vendors every 30 days. So our accounts receivable were always terrible with a client like that. And then sometimes the people you work with would just didn't like paperwork. So they weren't processing invoices and you were constantly going back and providing all the backup. So I remember at one point we had talked to TBWA and they were out of New York, but they had a St. Louis office and they had always respected our work. So Tragos was the CEO at the time. And I remember we had like $300,000 in payables due. And Jack told me, he said, get a hold of Tragos and have him buy a minority stake in our business. And so I called him. I'm literally in LA. I get on a payphone, this for cell phones, get on a payphone. And I called him and I said, look, we've got an issue. Anheuser-Busch is slow pay. You know that. I really need 300 grand. And I was going to sell him a third of the business for $300,000. And he listened to me very politely. And he said, Mitch, I would love to have a third of your business for that price, but I'm not. He said, it would be stealing your company. You call IB and tell them to pay their goddamn bills. Tell them Dick Tragos said so. And so I did. The next phone call, I called, Jack McDonough, and it's like, Trago said, pay your bills. And it's one of those things that you don't go to the highest level and say, hey, your people aren't paying. You just try to work with them. And so that taught me a big lesson. And to this day, I'm so appreciative that he didn't take a third of our company. It was a desperate act, but we got through it. And fortunately, we realized that they weren't that profitable and we had to move on for the sake of all the people we had. Was the best move we ever made.
That's honorable. That's the type of support you want from people in the industry. What lesson did you
Yeah.
learn from that?
Well, the lesson I've learned over and over again is don't be undercapitalized. When you go into business, regardless of what it is, you need capital. And whatever you think you need when you put your business plan together, double it. Because not having enough capital to start or grow the company properly, it takes years to dig out. And many people just don't. Many people just go belly up because it's like they can't pay their bills anymore. I think we wrote a couple of personal checks for payroll for the few people we had in the beginning, and that was sobering. But at the end of the day, it got everybody focused on profitability and making sure that the jobs we were working hard on were going to pay everybody and give us a profit margin.
You started thinking about profit. You were too small initially in your 5-year plan that expanded, which is like every 5-year plan that takes 15 years. When did you start taking buyers seriously?
Say we were probably 12 years into it. Once we got these major clients and the contracts, the bigger ad agencies were very interested in us because back in the late 90s, there was a lot of acquisition going on, just rolling up revenue streams. and trying to bring on different capabilities. So the big ad agencies liked us because we got involved from the very beginning in branding, like naming, packaging, developing the brand. We did all the promotional print. We did some promotional advertising, web development, back in the day before that was something, people could do themselves in Squarespace. We had some people we hired that were very talented at that we could put together a website. So it really was a nice bolt on to some of the big ad agencies that were doing media buying and, just basically TV production. Then when they started seeing clients that were committing that kind of revenue to us on a agency of record structure, there were quite a few interested. And then we were able to be a little bit more selective. And all I really cared about was our people. Jack and I had done what we wanted to do. We were going to make some money when we sold this place, but I didn't want our people's lives to have to change dramatically because they were so good at what they did. They held the culture together. And I'm telling you, I think we got to hire multiple because of our culture. I will tell anybody with a company that they're wanting to sell, make sure that that is noticeable.
How did you make it noticeable to prospective buyers?
Well, the first thing when they would come in to the agency, we definitely wanted them to meet the people, meet the creatives, understand what we did for our clients, but it wasn't about, just here's the portfolio of work. It's like, here's the team that does this for Bacardi. And because all of our assets walk out the door at night, right? We're not making money while we're sleeping. It's only when our people are engaging their brains and grabbing the clients and that kind of thing. And it's if it's not about the people, I don't know what it's about. And the agencies that really didn't want to talk about that just wanted to see the financial statements, we pretty much broomed them aside. And then we ran into the Lowe and Partners out of London and the Interpublic Group. And Frank Lowe was a very creative guy, had a real culture in his agency. And when he met us, he felt like we were a throwback to the 60s. And he said, don't you guys ever change. And by this time, he was a bit of a curmudgeon, like he wasn't feeling it, but he could see it in us. And he knew it was part of why we were so successful.
Describe the courting process. You'd built this thing from the ground up. You've built a culture that you love to show up for. And now you're getting prospective buyers, highlighting you for that culture, wanting to help you. What was the pitch? Like, how did they get you over the line?
I mean, at the time, our CEO was a guy that we hired from Ralston. He had worked for the CEO of Rawl Corp. And then he came over to work with us. And his whole job was to dress the baby for sale, to make sure that our financials were in good shape and, like put up the data room so that they could see what they needed. And so at this point, we were looking for a buyer. So just basically explaining to them. So we wanted to work with some of their teams because senior management always claims that when they're buying or, acquiring an agency, that they want everybody to work together so that they can provide all of those services to their clients. That wasn't my experience. My experience was the ad guys drove everything. They came up with the ideas, and then they'd call us 10 days out and say, hey, we need some promotional concepts and, some promotional packaging to support this idea. You got 10 days. And it's like, oh no, that's not how we work. We're happy to sit with you and come up with this stuff because sometimes what works in advertising doesn't work at retail and promotion. And that has always been the rub. Oh, that the client would have to then take that concept and then work with a company like ours. It just never really held together as well as it should. And I believe that that was, something that could be accomplished. It's just that they were so stuck in their ways and, didn't really want to meet new people. So we really worked hard to see if that was a potential. And I thought it would be great for our staff if they could expand their client base and knowledge and have some international clients. So again, looking out for our people. And of course they said, oh yeah, that'll that'll all work that way. And in the beginning, I think they tried, but just human nature took over.
Help us understand the transaction. So you sold to a big network. The expectations they had set, they missed the mark on. How locked in were you to post-close earnout, post-close working for the new brand, and how different at all was it for you?
So we negotiated a 4-year earnout. They had wanted a 5, and we negotiated it down to 4. And in the beginning, they wanted control so that they could report to Wall Street that they had, they could roll up our revenue into theirs. So they bought 51% on the downstroke. That was probably two-thirds cash and one-third stock, Interpublic stock. So then they incentivized us to not only improve our profit margin dollars, but percentages as well. So they structured the multiple based on the profit margin. So if we could get up to, from a 22 to a 25% profit margin, our multiple would go from a 5 to a 6. So we all worked very diligently to hit that. And we did. We were able to, hit the higher numbers over the 4-year period of time. And, we benefited by that. And then the payout was at the end. And that was December of 1999 when we thought Y2K was going to just wreck the planet. And off we went.
You pull out the personal credit cards and say, well, just do the arbitrage. Business expenses
You
on
know
personal
what?
cards, margin goes up.
It was a hell of a party. And in fact, the day we signed all the legal documents to sell, my partner, he gave me an envelope after dinner, and my husband had come because he signed the paperwork as well. And so as we're driving home, it was this lovely letter from him saying, I love you. I never could have done this without you. I've taken the liberty to buy you something that I've always seen you owning. And I'm like, and Jack's a creative guy, and he and I shared cooking. We loved cooking. And so I'm like, what kind of kitchen gadget is it? Right. And so I said to my husband, is it something for the kitchen? No. Is it something crazy for the yard, like a yard ornament or something? He said, no. And I said, where is it? And he said, well, you'll see when we get home. We pull in the driveway. He opens the garage door to pull in, and there's a Harley sitting there. Jack bought me a Harley because he had always seen me like as a Harley chick. Never ridden a motorcycle in my life, and I had to take lessons and learn how to ride my Harley, which, to this day is just such a precious memory of him.
Yeah. He thought of you as such a badass.
A badass, I guess. Oh, I had the
Yeah.
jacket, the gloves, I had the whole
Oh,
9
yeah.
yards, yeah.
Yeah. Or was he trying to, earn the Harley Davidson contract, contributing to business development? What Thinking back on that time, because it's life changing, right? You finally got to the end of that portion of the journey. How many people were you? What kind of opportunity did you see in the new, IPG owned version of the agency?
So at the time, we were about 350 employees with 5 offices around the country. Still our big clients. Like they were all still on retainers, and we had just hoped things would continue to go on that path, right? And they would grow and have opportunities through IPG. What we didn't realize was some of the people there were there to work for us. Like they really liked what we created, who we were, how they were treated. And when we left, they were, not so happy about it. It's like, oh, who are these new guys? I don't want to try to fill out a different expense report. Our people were pretty indignant. So quite a few of them left and started their own agency. We had a great shop in town called Rogers Townsend, and they were hiring and growing. And so they took quite a few of our people, and I think there's probably 5 agencies in town now that were outbursts from Zipatoni. And it really shocked us. We didn't think that they would do that, but we were really proud of them too. They felt like they had the experience and they wanted to launch out and do it on their own. They've been successful and I couldn't be prouder, but it really did surprise me that that happened fairly quickly.
Yeah, when an M&A transaction gets announced, the recruiters start calling and
Yeah.
competing agencies look at it as an opportunity to get great talent. And then, of course, the culture is going to change. And some people are there for the parents who are running it. Now there's different parents and they
Right.
start their own agencies, which is, the barrier to entry is get one client and you can start an
Yeah,
agency pretty
exactly.
easily.
Or bring somebody over that has that relationship, right? Because we had great relationship with our clients at senior levels. That's one thing I think we were different than our competitors in that we would climb to the highest levels in the C-suite that we could to give them our feedback, to get them to trust us and tell us what kept them awake at night. Because a lot of times, down into the marketing ranks and the sales ranks, they don't even really know what that CMO or the CEO is worried about, right? And if you can be a sounding board and you look and sound smart and do good things for them, that's the best place to have your anchor when stuff changes all the time. New brand people come on and they want to bring another agency that they worked with because they feel comfortable. When we were at Miller, we had all their business. We had staffed up. We had moved our office. We'd spent a fortune getting in place for them. 2 years into that, Philip Morris terminated their top three people, the CEO, the CMO, and the head of sales. And I got a phone call that said, "You need to be in Milwaukee at 8 a.m. tomorrow. There's a all hands on deck meeting." And so we get there and hear that, these people that we worked 2 years crawling into their offices are gone. And they brought in someone from Kraft for the CMO. They brought in someone for Philip Morris for CEO. And it was like, oh my gosh, we have all new people and faces, and they all have relationships with agencies that are not us. And it's the biggest contract there, right? So it was concerning, but it's like, "Okay, you need to come down and meet our people. Let's show you what we do for you." And so it was about a month until they were able to get their feet underneath them, and they all flew down on the company plane. And I had my beer team. We had met every day since then, and I said, "Look, we can spend 10 minutes showing them what they get for their money. We'll show them the NASCAR program and the Super Bowl program, but after that, we're gonna tell them what we think they should do." And my staff was like, "Are you nuts?" And I'm like, "No." I said, "We sit in this conference room and talk all the time about if we were running the place, what we would do." And I said, "Let's tell them. Let's let them see that we have brains. They're not gonna agree with it all, but at least they're gonna see we're thinking about their business." And so we started the meeting with a picture of Adweek, and we put the new VP of marketing that came from Philip Morris on the cover of Adweek. And the title was Miller Brewing Company Overtakes Anheuser-Busch in the Beer Wars. I thought our direct reports that we had been working with, I thought they were going to faint and like slide under the table. And we spent the next 2 hours basically saying you should kill this brand. Here's 6 packages you should get rid of. Here's 3 new ones you should introduce. Here's how you should restructure your sales and national accounts. And I am telling you, no one could believe what we were saying except the VP of marketing. He said at the end of the meeting, he looked around at his team and he said, "Put that cover shot back up." And I did. And he said, "What's wrong with that?" Just as sour as he could be. And his guys were all looking at their shoes. And he finally said, "It's not 10 years, it's 5 years." And so I knew at that point we had sunk the hook. It's like
Yeah.
these people can think. They're not afraid to tell us what they think is right. And no, we're not going to do all that, but we might do some of it. And, we started off on the right foot with that whole new management team. And it was
Yeah.
risky, could have blown up.
Do you feel okay? Well, besides the obvious wins throughout your career, did you feel like you were going to retire and move to Hawaii after you were done?
I did.
How did you get yourself mentally prepared for non dopamine hits of winning pitches and impressing people. And like, this is exciting stuff, Mitch. And then to retire seems like a big drop off. How did you manage that?
I had been so busy. I had traveled so much because we had these regional offices that I felt like I'd never won that Mother of the Year award. My son was in high school at the time. My daughter was going into seventh or eighth grade. I immediately went to the Catholic school and said, "Okay, I'm here to volunteer." I just had to write checks the years before because I didn't have the time to volunteer. But, it's like I'm here. And I really, really wanted to spend more time with my family. And I love to cook. I love to garden. I have chickens. I'm kind of a little urban farmer. And so I had plenty to make myself, happy, but then, I couldn't get out of my own way. I like to learn about things, and when my son went away to college in Colorado, cannabis was just legal, and so I was blown away by, "Oh my gosh, here's a whole new industry springing up," and, I couldn't help myself to stop asking questions and looking into it and researching it, and, I don't think I really missed working that hard, but probably my brain was always going on something, and my kids, they didn't wanna spend that much time with me.
You can only ride that Harley so much.
That's so funny. I remember my son was a Saturday morning, and he was probably, I don't know, 10 or 11, and we went to a soccer game, little YMC soccer game, and I'm driving home like a bat out of hell, and he says, "Mom," he looks at me in the rearview mirror, he goes, "Mom," he says, "Can we go to the mall today?" And I said, "No, I'm riding my Harley." I said, "It's such a nice day, I haven't been able to ride it." And he was so disappointed, he goes, "Why can't you be like other moms and take me to the mall?" It's 'cause I don't like the mall.
No, you definitely don't have the trappings of a mall mom. What do you think from the industry perspective? You're in an advantaged position where you've been able to see it from afar. You've interacted it from a client side, product side, brand side. Where do you think the industry's going? You're in a different category. You're still working hard, but I'm sure plenty of owners still reach out to you and you potentially mentor.
It is, as I said earlier, it is such a different space with AI coming on now. I know a lot of agency people are very nervous. They're going to have to figure out how to work with it and make it a force multiplier. I still think that relationships, at that senior level are going to be incredibly important. So, just understanding different business models, bringing a real sense of gravitas to somebody's business. These people want you to think with them. They want you to help solve problems, but it's going to take fewer people than ever. It's really screwy on media. Like it used to be simple when there were three networks and outdoor and print and radio. That was not that hard to figure out. But if you think about all the different media and the podcasts and influencers and digital stuff, it's a completely different kettle of fish right now. And I think it's hard. The agency I mentioned, Rogers Townsend, was acquired by WPP agency, and they just closed them down a year ago. And the one thing that the founder said to me was, he said, "It's not fun like it used to be." He said, "These young people don't have any commitment to the company." The people that we worked with at Anheuser-Busch, they were lifers. They loved beer. They loved AB. Same thing with Ralston. And we loved it the same. And so it was a great relationship. He said, you can't create those relationships anymore because people don't feel the fondness and the attraction to the particular company. It's to the job, and they'll take the next best job they find, which I thought was really telling.
Do you think it's a problem the industry won't be able to solve? Are you that pessimistic? Or do you feel that there's still a place for that trusted partner in the C suite to help them create solutions and gain
Hopefully,
awareness?
I wanna believe there is. I do wanna believe that there is a trusted place, because otherwise I wouldn't know how to approach it. It's hard to be that transactional, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. It's not easy for founders today. And it's like I said, it's never been easy for founders. Of course, running a small business, hiring people, delivering great work asks a lot of you. And at the end of the day, the constant is change. And you've probably been in a privileged position to educate and mentor both in the local community, but maybe the industry at large. So, what are some of your final advice, closing thoughts for founders who are listening to this today, have a mountain to climb, whether that be big client relationship, an acquisition, selling their agency? What kind of message would you leave them?
Well, I would say look for a really specific niche to get started and be the best in that niche. I have a nephew that started an agency 16 years ago in my kitchen with a partner. And at the time, everybody wanted to work for Anheuser-Busch or some big CPG company because that's what was fun and felt like there was a lot of money out there in that regards. And there was, but the problem was it's incredibly competitive and sometimes the margins aren't good. So they started looking into who doesn't get attention these days, and they liked the manufacturing space. And they have just thrived because they started there. It wasn't sexy. The clients that they called on, nobody really knew who they were, making generators, but they got extremely involved and felt respected because that type of customer was not getting called on by agencies, right? That were necessarily that creative. So I've been thrilled just to watch them grow and to see how good they are. And, they're incredibly close and connected to these clients. And that's what you want as an owner of a company. If you love your client and they love you back, that's what makes working those long hours and traveling worth it. So trying to get that relationship, I think would be the goal and continue to build in that niche and don't try to broaden out and go for the bright, shiny objects because everybody's going for them.
Now, what I hear you saying is the whale client is an idealistic startup position that everybody wants. But if you can niche down, really embed yourself with the industry, the founders who are running those businesses, you have the relationship capital. Like as you started, all these businesses need capital, the relationship capital to sustain in this, uncertain AI world because you're a trusted partner to the people who are making business decisions. And
Right.
that's what I
And
hear
I
reflected
see
in your
that.
story.
Yes, and I think today with AI, there are so many, like I'm on a bank board, and I said to them, "Are you guys using it at all?" And they're like, "No, we got a Rolodex, but we don't have an AI." And I said, "Well, we need to start looking into this." And so I have been bringing them people to present and talk about how it could work. I think companies like that are really on the bubble of what do we do next is a real opportunity now for agencies that will be aggressive and go in and say, look, here, I'm going to show you how to use this. And you may have to hire another marketing person or bring on a small agency. It will be a force multiplier for you, but look at the people that are confused right now. That's where the opportunity is, and just go as hard and fast as you can at it and make sure they feel like they can't live without you.
Brilliant. Mitch, thank you for sharing wisdom. If an owner is curious about what you have going on now or has questions about your journey or is in a similar place throughout your career, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Best way is my email. It's Mitch, Mitch, at beliefco, BELEAFCO.com.
And Mitch, I wish I could highlight your next venture more. I do want to double tap on this. It's not always someone's first venture that they create the biggest impact. It's sometimes their second. And the level of attention you're giving to your new vocation is impressive. You're almost recreating a new category for yourself. So then I can talk about your next exit because the cannabis industry and the scaling business and the aggregation of that space, especially as it becomes more widely federally accepted, is going to be huge. Mitch, you're supposed to not be doing so much.
It totally is. And who wants to be in it is the alcohol beverage people. So I may be back working with some of my pals.
Yeah, it's a sister industry, isn't it? Mitch, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Peter. It was fun.